Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com. Ozcast.
Hello world, I'm John Bruni and you're listening to Strategicon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. Since Chinese Premier Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, the People's Republic of China has been taking a very uncharacteristically belligerent stand against Asia and the world. No longer content to let China bide its time and hide its claws, Xi's foreign policy has been all about baring China's fangs and claws for everyone to see. Of the countries of Southeast Asia most at harm from this Chinese policy is the Philippines. A relatively poor country with a small and outdated armed force, the Philippines can be considered most at risk from Chinese threats. Sharing claims with China and other Southeast Asian nations to the heavily contested South China Sea, the Philippines can only realistically maintain its position, mainly around Scarborough Shoal, with American military support. However, the Philippine government of Rodrigo Duterte does not enjoy good relations with Washington, possibly jeopardizing any bilateral security guarantees. If the Philippines can't count on American support to bail them out of any future confrontation with the People's Republic, what are its alternatives? To discuss this, today we are joined by Dr. Chester Cabalza. Chester is president and founder of the Manila-based think tank, the International Development and Security Cooperation Organization, IDSC. Chester, welcome to Strategicon.
Thank you for inviting me.
Chester, can you tell our listeners what has caused the ructions between Manila and Washington?
Okay, in 2016, when President Duterte ran for office for presidency in the Philippines, actually, he really wanted to offer us three flagship projects. One would be the independent foreign policy. The secondly is the controversial drug war. And lastly would be the Build program, which he promised to the Filipino people. By doing that, of course, he wanted to diversify our relationship, aside from the US being a treaty ally in Asia for so long. And one of the reasons why he wanted to pivot to Beijing is to basically diversify our relations. And there were some of the colonial experiences that we experienced with Washington, which in Duterte's mind did not align to his own values. So basically, that was some of the misgivings that Duterte had with Washington. Now, during the 5-year presidency of Duterte, having pivoted to Beijing, we noticed that his promises were actually not fully fulfilled. For the main reasons that let's discuss the following flagship programs that he has had. First, when it comes to the drug war, of course, it received a lot of international human rights reactions and violations, because basically a lot of Filipinos died during that saga on the drug war episode. And secondly, up to now, the drug problem in the country has not yet been resolved. So that is a huge vacuum when it comes to this criminal and political dilemma which the drug war has offered, which we have in the Philippines. Now, on the independent foreign policy, I think when he proposed that to the Philippines, it was really unclear. What does he mean by an independent foreign policy? Does that mean that we veer away from Washington and yield to Beijing? Is that was a question basically. But it seems like every year he goes to Beijing for some consolidation of concessions with Xi Jinping on the volatility of the zero, and basically to ask pledges, economic pledges for his third flagship program, which is the Build infrastructure. Now, as promised by Beijing that they will help us in the Build infrastructure, we saw that nothing has been added to the infrastructures of the Philippines. Of course, there were plans, but even up to now, it's been 5 years already, and we haven't seen any mega project coming from China. So that becomes a big problem now, because given that there is the checkbook diplomacy that China is offering to us, it seems like it's not been seen and realized, and a lot of Filipinos are asking, where are those projects? Now, the intervention that China did to us is to open up the vaccine diplomacy, and of course, given that we are in the pandemic right now, that's how they put some interventions on the Build program of the current administration. But the problem there is, despite the offers on the vaccine diplomacy, it seems like Beijing is having a schizophrenic behavior, because while they are donating and giving some aid on the vaccine diplomacy, at the same time they are still in their business as usual in the West Philippine Sea by with their military aggression and basically with their maritime power ambition, which hurts the Filipinos, because it's hurting the sovereignty of the Philippines. So those are some of the things that we have heard.
I'm just wondering, Chester, I mean, with regard to the whole One Belt, One Road infrastructure program,
right,
there's been a lot of things happening within that space that have been less than stellar in terms of how recipient countries see Chinese assistance, because this is not the first time that I've heard that, the Chinese have been promising a lot and delivering very little. But with regard to the Philippines, is that something to do with the fact that you guys are still technically in the US-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty, and so the Chinese are trying to use this as a way of, strong-arming Duterte to loosen more of the Philippines' links to the United States?
Right. I get the point. Given the sophistication of the wolf warrior diplomacy that Beijing is ushering right now, they saw some of the gaps with our defense treaties with the United States. First would be the Mutual Defense Treaty. In that agreement, it says that in case of foreign aggression, the U.S. would help us. But we saw that since the Obama's pivot to Asia, and then after that, there was the Trump's Indo-Pacific strategy. The more Beijing became aggressive, and some of the features in the West Philippine Sea were controlled by the People's Liberation Army Navy. So we were like asking, where is Washington? What happened to the promises of Washington at that time? So we saw some vacuum there. That's why Manila toned down its expectation from Manila at the time. And the reason for that is to basically befriend Beijing, hoping that by befriending Beijing, they would spare some of our islands. But it seems like Beijing is not changing their behavior. They are very consistent with their plans. And suddenly, Manila was surprised, because all we thought that by friendship, they could at least spare some of our islands there. Now, of course, there was a flip-flopping, changing foreign policy coming from Manila because of the volatility of the regional security and what is happening in the West Philippine Sea. So we thought that Beijing would definitely help us, but nonetheless, it's not helping us. So we again asked favor from Washington by definitely having the Mutual Defense Treaty. But another problem last year was the abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement that would operationalize the Mutual Defense Treaty. Because, of course, one of the allies of Duterte, who is a senator, was not granted with an American visa. So Duterte thought that abrogating the Visiting Forces Agreement would be a punishment for Washington. But of course, the U.S. was alarmed by the situation, and even up to now, the abrogation is still pending. So in other words, they cannot operationalize the Mutual Defense Treaty because of the abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement. And there's another agreement with the Americans, the Enhanced Defense Mutual something like that, that would help us in a way to enhance that, which was proposed by Obama at the time. But nonetheless, this is the problem here. Despite all the support and help coming from Washington, it seems like Duterte is snubbing the efforts of Washington, mainly because there was a concession that he made with Beijing, which up to now remains questionable to a lot of Filipinos. We do not know what is that concession that he has made with Beijing, because 2 nights ago he has this pronouncement. For the first time during the pandemic, he discussed about the West Philippine Sea issue, and he said that there's nothing wrong with Chinese illegal fishing in the West Philippine Sea, unless they dig something there. That's the only time we will react. And it seems like that's a little bit problematic. We've been fighting a lot over the West Philippine Sea, and all of a sudden the commander-in-chief and the chief architect of the Philippines on foreign policy in the Philippines is saying that. And despite that, the ministers or secretaries of foreign affairs and defense are already adamant on their stance on the West Philippine Sea. So what is the problem here? So it seems like there is a flip-flopping and inconsistencies with the pronouncements and policies of the government. That's why even if we have a strong or maybe dwindling alliance with the United States, it seems like Duterte is not giving much attention to Washington.
Well, all I can say about that is that it seems from what you've said that the Philippines is kind of still a victim of Obama's foreign policy. But now I'm going to switch to David.
Just something I was thinking.
Yes, Tim. Good morning.
Good morning. Just something I was thinking about as you were speaking then, and that is, it's difficult enough to understand the sort of Philippines decision-making process. But if we look at it from Beijing's perspective, they're happy to intimidate or they're happy to buy influence. And it's almost like they've been sort of, counterbalancing, well, we can promise the Philippines infrastructure or we can try intimidation. And if intimidation works, why would we spend money on infrastructure? So could we hypothesize that we're now getting a combination of intimidation at sea and vaccines as the carrot, and that is as good a deal as the Philippines is going to get from Beijing?
Right. There was a news lately, actually recently, stating that Duterte has been tough with the Filipino people, but he could not be tougher to Beijing. And that has been questioned, because how come that even if a lot of Filipinos now are asking the president to be more strong in his pronouncements against China, how come that he cannot bend some of their concessions with Beijing? Now, regarding that, I think the question now is definitely this is a score for Beijing, because they are intimidating us and without going into war, and they are winning. And it seems like their grand strategy towards the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea is basically effective without any arms race, and basically by simply doing intimidation against us. Now, of course, they also attribute it to the aggressiveness of their diplomats, because basically the ambassador and defense attaches and the other attaches in the of China in Manila are doing a lot of things also. Of course, with their vaccine diplomacy in the Philippines, imagine that they were the first one to offer support aid to the Philippines. And despite that, the Philippines has a number of alliance to other big major powers also. Nonetheless, of course, another thing would be interventions on infrastructure programs, because I also noticed that as I wear another hat as one of the reviewers for the environmental certificate, where we give that to mega projects. And I also noticed that most of the mega projects that are being approved now, and there's a priority to some of the mega projects for China-funded infrastructures in the country. And although it's not yet constructed, but it's still the process is ongoing. Meaning to say that maybe after Duterte's office, those infrastructures will be built, and completed. But there's that is a confusion, a bafflement for us here in Manila, because basically, how come that China is winning without doing anything, and by simply offering a lot of things to us by using checkbook diplomacy, and also their vaccine diplomacy. So in other words, the problem that I see here is the lack of foresight, strategic foresight, and implementation of strategies in the Philippines. From 2000 until 2020, we just completed our national defense military strategy, national defense strategy, national security strategy, and national security policy. But there was no overarching mechanism on how to consolidate all of these strategies. Meaning to say that we use it differently in different situations. So it's not harmonized, and knowing Filipino style and culture here, sometimes we tend to forget the unified command because of silo in government and stuff like that. And this becomes a problem because each one of the major services in the armed forces have their own strategy. And also, secondly, we still don't have a strong naval and air force, air power. And if we look at the external defense of the Philippines, it's very weak. Because for the longest time, we just relied to the Americans. It's only recently that we decided and thought of building our own defense posture on our external defense. That's the reason why lately we've been acquiring some naval assets and military hardware for us to meet at least the minimum defense posture for the country. But so far, in terms of the strength, we really we, of course, definitely Beijing is more powerful than us. But there were cases where numbers can be outwitted by or strategies can be outwitted by numbers. We've seen that in Philippine.
Chester, I was just wondering. I mean, the Philippines is an archipelagic state, and you made mention about what you consider the vulnerabilities of the armed forces. But of course, if you're looking at it from an external perspective, there's that, and then there's, of course, the ongoing internal security challenges that the Philippines faces, right? So you've got the Muslim separatists in the southern island state of Mindanao. You've got the communist New People's Army, which is no longer really communist. It's just an opportunistic mess. And then you've got a bunch of clan-based private armies running around in the back, in the back blocks of the Philippines, causing mischief wherever they can. So in many ways, when we're talking about the Philippine Armed Forces and modernizing it and making it user-friendly for the Philippine commanders to actually not only get on top of the external challenges, but also the internal challenges, how much effort needs to be expended? Because it seems like it's going to be a very costly and very lengthy exercise, yeah?
One significant, it's a big cultural issue. Yeah. So if you don't mind, Chester, speak to that too. As much as dollars affect all of this, we can see that the dollars flowed towards the Philippines early on in the war on terror, which allowed capacity for internal action to increase significantly. But there was no equivalent money or cultural shift to prepare to deal with external challenges. So in a sense, the war on terror doubled down the historical norm in the Philippines of preparing for internal threats. So now the shift to an external threat is like the strategic world has been turned upside down in the Philippines literally overnight.
Yeah, that shows the complexity of the national security issue in the Philippines, because basically, you have a duality of a situation or problem here. You have internal threat, at the same time you have external problem also. Now, policymakers in the Philippines are not even well-versed when it comes to national security. That becomes a problem here. That's the reason why we have flip-flopping of policy. And also, the armed forces should also delegate the internal security issue to the Philippine police. because basically that the internal issue on terrorism, insurgency should be the problem of the police and no longer with the military. Because the role of the military is to basically secure and protect our sovereignty on our external defense. That has been a problem here, and also that was written in our constitution. But because of the laxity, and of course because of the lack of trust to the police, Philippine National Police, then that role was delegated again to the armed forces. So the armed forces is wearing two hats here for its defense role and constabulary role. So meaning to say, it's really complex because there are many demands and commands of the president to the armed forces. And, it's overheating everything. And also the situation on the internal and the external is not properly managed because of the many policies and strategies that are not cohesive and integrated and harmonized.
In your opinion, though, what is the national priority? Is it the internal challenges or is it the external challenges? Because from an outsider's perspective,
Right.
I see the Philippines with all its internal challenges confronting a giant like China, who's cashed
Right.
up to the max and is doing all kinds of strange things to the Philippines. But is there a situation where CCP operatives can dump a bag of money in some private militia's hands to
And
go
keep
crazy?
it internal.
And to keep Manila basically in that state of confusion, because all of a sudden you've got these small groups, what we would normally call a low intensity conflict with the Filipino government, all of a sudden becoming
Higher
much
intensity because
exactly.
of Chinese intervention.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, is there this possibility that you've got to also take into account?
Right. In the Philippines, one of our issues here would be how to deal with these security threats. And it seems like our country, our policymakers are just very reactive to the situation. There is no priority. It depends on which threat would impede the national security first. Meaning to say that if there is a terrorist act, then we focus on that. If the Chinese incursions happens, then we focus on that. So meaning to say there is no prioritization, although it sets an unequal footing also. It's a very reactive and limited on how we foresee it, and definitely on how we resolve the issue. And also, like what I've been telling here, there is no strong policy, and that would guide the government on the priorities on solving the national security issues. But I would like to suggest that, of course, given that we have already, first on the external defense, we have already completed all the different strategies and doctrines that the armed forces and the maritime enforcement agencies should be using. Now, it's high time that we should also put a national territorial defense framework, because that framework would help us on how to synthesize everything and what would be the strategies, the best strategy that would be used. I know for a fact that the Philippines has been excellent in its lawfare. We are very good in that. We won the Hague ruling, and we have best minds on how to persuade the president and the international community on the use of the international law. I think we've been doing that a lot. But when it comes to the military operations, I think we are lacking on that. But recently, our Coast Guard and the Navy and Marines are doing its responsibility right now. They are raising the flag right now. They are asserting our rights and sovereignty there. We are rocking the boat so far, because we learned that China is not changing anyway, and there's an upcoming election next year, and that would also change the ballots next year of whether or not Duterte's promises and campaigns were successful. Secondly, on the internal defense security threats, we still have the longest insurgency in Asia, or if not in the world. But it seems like the strategy on red tagging lately has become very controversial here. Is not effective. One is because I keep on telling to the media about the armed forces lack of intelligence gathering. They are not so good. It has to retrain them. The armed forces should retrain and, of course, integrate some of their counterinsurgency measures and the strategies there. Secondly, and also because we dislike that because these are government-funded intelligence gathering, and they are wasting the money of the Filipino people. So in other words, the problem there is their doctrine and strategy. And they have to retrain their assets, their agents, basically, and officers, because it's not really effective. Counterterrorism, there's no effective policy yet that I've seen so far. That's the reason why we've been asking allies, like, of course, and partners, strategic partners like the United States. We've seen that in Marawi. And of course, Australia is helping us also on counterterrorism and cybersecurity. So I think when it comes to this, there are flaws, and we need the whole of alliance approach here when it comes to our internal and external security issues. But I think my suggestion and recommendation here is that we should build our own indigenous capability, because there are ASEAN countries who were able to handle their problems. Look at Vietnam and Indonesia. Without their support from major powers, although lately, of course, they've been communicating and, of course, extending the non-verbal with the major powers. But because of their own indigenous capability on how to counter big powers, especially against their sovereignty, they were able to modernize their armed forces using their own capability. And I think the Philippines should learn from that, because we've been relying so much with major powers, particularly with the United States, and lately with China. This confusing independent foreign policy is not helping us so far, because there's none. There's no independent foreign policy, basically.
Chester, just on that, Tim would like to say something.
I assume that it would be in Washington's interest to counteract Beijing's influence in the Philippines. Would that be a correct assumption to make?
Pretty much.
So clearly there is some advantage to Washington not providing the resources, even money, to counteract the kind of corruption that you would find in the police, let's say, in the Philippines, that is typical of a developing nation, because that kind of corruption then also allows the CIA to come in and do some kind of insurgency as well. So fundamentally, it seems as if to counteract any kind of Beijing influence also removes the typical American form of influence in the Philippines. So their inaction actually kind of speaks to them wanting to do effectively the same thing. Is that a fair thing to say?
Again, business as usual doesn't work for the Americans, because business as usual was to throw money at the Philippines, most of which got siphoned off. It would have to be a completely different model of equipment and training and capacity building. And that's something they've not thought of doing, and they don't really want to put the personnel and equipment in. And it's very much the same as this is the kind of relationship the Philippines needs with every potential partner.
Right.
Don't throw money at the Philippines, send a training team, and provide the equipment for people to be trained on.
Right. Okay. So we can say that money doesn't necessarily ensure development, but to get Philippines to a developed state, if you were to call it that, is about throwing resources at it.
So Australia going there to help with counterterrorism, actively being there. Now it's a micro scale, and even we at our scale should do something far bigger. But the only thing that's going to work is actually training people and equipping people. So the only money coming at them is their normal pay from the Filipino government, and everything else is coming from, the partnership to build capacity in a meaningful way. And that's how you get the cultural change. You're not going to get cultural change any other way, because people need to line their pockets, because historically that was normal. Right.
So, but that's that. I guess this is my point, right? It's in both Beijing and Washington's interest to effectively keep that status quo in the Philippines, because that's how they operate on an international scale, as I see it. But in Australia could step in and provide resources to the Philippines, and then actually end up with a proximal and capable friend.
Yeah, well, that would be ideal, except for the fact that there are some people in the Australian defence environment who would say that we haven't got our crap together either.
Yeah, but we haven't, and the only way we're going to get better is to help other people.
Well, no, I agree with
So through
that.
training, you get more competent.
Yeah.
So we're in a situation here where it needs to be the Japanese, us, the Brits, the South Koreans, everybody with capacity who wants to get more competent in their own right, who wants to justify their dispense.
Here's a very uncomfortable question, though, spinning off from what that. So,
okay.
Chester, the uncomfortable question is, how confident do you think foreign interests, foreign military interests, for instance, would be dealing with the local Filipino environment in terms of members of the armed forces, members of the national police? I mean, you've unpacked for us just how complex the Filipino security situation is.
Right.
But if, say, for instance, Canberra, Washington, Tokyo, Seoul, they don't have political confidence in the Duterte government, or they don't have confidence in the Filipino structure as it's currently conceived, what is the likelihood of the Philippines receiving the benefit of these countries' assistance in any meaningful way?
Yeah, I like the question, even if it's a little bit comfortable, but basically it all boils down to the whole of alliance approach.
Yeah.
Where basically when you, in that whole of alliance approach, you have different countries with different capabilities. And given that, of course, we know for a fact that the Philippines has a weak defense posture when it comes to its internal and external defense, it will ask for the help of foreign armed forces with their military hardware and strategies and doctrines. But like what I've been telling to the media in the Philippines here, it all boils down to our own strategy and how and our policy, because basically the support coming from other countries, particularly on the military hardware that you are donating to us. Although some of the donations are not brand new and are secondhand, and also when you donate, also you have to train the people on how to use and manipulate it. So human resources is also important. So it should be the hardware and the human resources should align to the strategy and values of the armed forces and other enforcement agencies. Because even if you have those equipment, if you don't know how to use it and it doesn't align to your strategy, then it's not effective. We saw that in Marawi, we saw that in the West Philippine Sea. And so far, even if donations are, we see influx of donations. If the policies and the strategies are not adapting to the changing times, then that becomes a problem. Because we saw, how come that we have the longest insurgency in Asia, despite all this support coming from major powers? And it becomes a problem. It becomes a question. One is, of course, I do understand that we have issues on social injustices, corruption, political different political issues here. But it all boils down to basic services. If the government is responsive enough and would address the issues of poverty, social injustices, definitely their counterinsurgency would become successful. The military strategy is just a short-term remedy, but the long-term remedy would be addressing the social issues that have been hampering the development of the Philippines. In other words, it should come from us. The development is the answer. Prosperity would not make people cling to terrorism and insurgencies. And definitely they would be supporting and helping the government if their tummy are not hungry.
I'm curious, again, now we're starting to delve into the less comfortable aspects of Filipino security, but one question, and it's a hypothetical question, so feel free not to answer it, because if it's sensitive.
That's okay.
But would things be easier in the Filipino kind of security environment were there a different political leader in Manila?
Or a different elite? Let's make it two-part.
All right.
Because the leader is,
Yeah.
the leader is someone who the outside Western world look at and goes, wow, how's that possible? But you scratch a little bit deep and you go, it makes perfect sense based on the historical elite in the Philippines. When the historical elite are a problem, you get strange leaders.
Yeah. Chester.
That's true, because we thought that having a strong leader would basically help us be uplifted from all the many issues that we have in the Philippines. But we saw that lately, we see, of course, Duterte's regime is at the twilight right now because there will be elections come 20. And it seems like some of the promises he had made for us are not yet fulfilled. And going back to the kind of leadership that we have in the Philippines, it seems like, the reason why we have not yet arrived economically speaking, and also the kind of respect that we should be gaining from the international community is that there's a problem also in our political culture here. Given that, issues on the type of leaders that we are voting are not definitely helping us to advance some of the expectations that we have them. And secondly, there's a huge disparity between the rich and poor, and the middle class is very small. And when you have a small middle class, naturally, you would have a lot of deceptions coming from our elites and oligarchs to secure their own vested interests. So basically, you see the complexity of the Filipino society here. And thirdly, I think right now, in terms of our military, the armed forces, they are still staging their militarization program. And we are still at the second stage of that. And the third stage will commence in 2023 to 2028 to at least meet minimum credible deterrence. But I hope that the armed forces also would be apolitical, and sometimes, because in the Philippines, they've been dancing with the wolf, with the president, for their own survival also, and vis-a-vis for the survival of the president. And we see that kind of dependence coming from two different institutions that would give us a perception that the institutions in the Philippines are not that strong because it's very personalistic. It depends on the personality and the behavior and perception of the leader. And that becomes a problem because the president, the role of the president in the Philippines is very strong. He is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and also the chief architect of our foreign affairs. And if those things are, if his policies and programs are not effective, basically, then it will give us a domino effect on how we would want to have stronger institutions in the Philippines. And knowing that there is a very small oligarchs and middle class in the Philippines, definitely common Filipinos will follow selfish and greedy oligarchs and elites. And this will have an effect on how we progress as a nation state. That's the complexity of everything here in the Philippines.
Hey, it's nice to meet you. Hey, so good to see you. Hey, it's a great big world, so much to see. Come on, let's go. I'll show you everything. I think you're gonna like it here. A little bit different atmosphere, like a brand new frontier. I think you're gonna like it here. Hey, it's nice to meet you. Hey, so good to see you. Hey, it's a brand new day, so much to share. Come take my hand, I'll take you there. I think you're gonna like it here. A little bit different atmosphere. get here. Hey, it's nice to meet you. Hey, so good to see you.
There's another interesting angle that I just thought of. When I was doing my honors degree at Flinders University, my thesis was on the US bases in the Philippines. Now, of course, the US withdrew because Mount Pinatubo, but also there was this Filipino nationalism that really put a lot of pressure on the Americans.
Well, and the New World Order. The idea it was all going to be warm and fuzzy.
That's true too. That's true too. So we had all of these things that sort of came up, and it basically made America's position in the Philippines pretty much untenable. But, you know, focusing for the moment on the anti-American aspect, is there a sense that America doesn't really know what to do with the Philippines now that it lost?
Right, I agree.
Right,
I agree with that.
It knows how to have a colonial state. It doesn't know how to have a partner who needs help.
Right.
And it would, it probably couldn't get away with wanting a colonial state back because, the Filipinos wouldn't tolerate it. But the Americans either want freedom of access to do as they please, or they want a fast outcome, and they can't have either. So they're almost picking nothing instead.
Yeah, well, they are, and they're creating a major problem in Southeast Asia. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed, I was having a look at the map of the Philippines, and the thing that, I understand the jostling of or swarming of Chinese fishing boats around certain contested areas in the Western Philippine Sea, but the island of Palawan seems, for me, the most vulnerable to further encroachment because it actually sits a little bit further away from the main Indonesian archipelago, and it juts out into the South China Sea. So do you think that perhaps from an external perspective, the forces in Beijing are looking at Palawan as a potential Achilles heel of the Philippines to move into?
Okay, I want to address first the disconnect of Washington to Manila partially or temporarily for a period of time. When it was during the time of Cory Aquino, when there was a decision coming from Manila that to expel the American bases because of the strong nationalism at the time, and we were constituting our own constitution. So that was the context at the time. And of course, Washington thought that maybe they lost interest with Manila and focused their attention to some other issues worldwide. But again, they forgot that the Philippines is really a strategic, it has a strategic role in the Asia Pacific, and because of that, we did not see how Beijing became powerful. And of course, through Beijing's diplomacy, there was a videoke diplomacy of Jiang Zemin to Fidel Ramos, and then they started to get our mischief reef. That started their incursion and their invasion in the West Philippine Sea in 1995, and then there was the standoff, Scarborough standoff in 2012 that made us realize that we have to expose all our legal remedies against China because that's the only strengths that we have, because we cannot counter them militarily speaking. And then recently in 2019, you have the ramming of the maritime militia, and then of course the current Whitsun Reef right now we have here. Okay, and Washington saw the strategic importance of Manila, particularly in their FONOPS operations, the freedom of navigation and overflight. And it took time for them to realize that. How come that they ignored Manila, given that Beijing is becoming powerful. Maybe because there was a denial also from Washington that Beijing can mount its own grand strategy and become a very powerful country. I think that was one of the reasons. And Manila, at the time when Duterte became the president, also snubbed Washington for 5 years now, and until next year, basically, because of the lack of importance that Washington gave to Manila. And now, Washington learned its lesson, and they've been trying to find ways on how to deal with Duterte and with the Philippines, because they thought that, because they took for granted their stance with Manila. Now, they tried to offer help during their with the counterterrorism efforts in Marawi, but still, they could not support us economically because of through many infrastructure programs, because of their belief that human rights is primary. That's the reason why Beijing is very aggressive, because they don't consider that in their list when they would help the government in their infrastructure program. And Russia also doesn't look at that way. That's the reason why Manila pivoted also to Moscow. Remember, these are all popular leaders. You have Putin, Xi Jinping, Duterte there. And of course, Trump left is no longer in that picture. But even if both were popular leaders, Manila thought that Washington was not serious in their Indo-Pacific region strategy, because of their focus on the trade war at the time with Beijing. So those were the considerations so far. But now, here we are again. The Philippines is the global headline because of the Whitson brief. But it seems like the president is a little bit quiet on how to contain China, because in my own theory, perhaps there was concession that he made back then in his previous official visits to Beijing. And secondly, the Philippines has become an instrument also why Beijing became so powerful. It allowed China to continue with its militarization. And also, Manila thought that Washington's promise to us when it comes to mutual defense treaty and its other defense treaties with us cannot be realized. And it's only now that Washington is doing its best again on how to align with some of the visions of the government, right? Of visions of Manila right now. So it's evolving so far on how we deal with these policies of different powers, basically. I believe also that it's going to be expensive for Washington to send some of their war-fighting aircrafts and also submarines and other frigates and naval.
One thing. Now, with regard to the Americans having lost Clark Airfield and Subic Bay still exists as a port. And it's a vitally strategic deep water port. And Clark Airfield is still an airfield?
Yeah.
So if Americans, if the Filipino government were to say it's in our interest to, like for instance, here in Australia, we've got a rotational presence of Marines that
right.
Darwin.
Yeah.
So it's not a permanent presence, but it's kind of like a semi-permanent presence.
No, it's like Garrison Light.
Yeah, Garrison Light. Yeah, exactly. So couldn't the Philippines also? I mean, if they were really, if there's no other alternative, Chester, could they not try?
Yeah. This is what happened here. Clark Air Base and Subic Naval Base are turned into economic zones now.
Right.
So meaning to say that they are no longer that strategic that it used to be. But I've read from the plans of the armed forces that they're trying to do some strategic basing plans, meaning to say that they want to reassign some of the bases and focus on some other bases because of its strategic importance. Right. One would be Palawan. Yeah. It has to be protected. Secondly, Sulu in Mindanao. It has to be protected also. And also the one in Batanes up near Taiwan. So Subic and Clark are no longer that strategic because of its transformation as an eco hub. Now, if secondly, there's a modernization plan coming from the armed forces, meaning to say that because of the strategic basing that they are planning, meaning to say that they have to find some other bases given its strategic importance. And also there were plans coming from the armed forces to change the commands also because of the extent of the China aggression in the Philippines, and also because of the terrorist threat also in the country. So the traditional bases are no longer that effective and strategic. That's why the Philippines has to find some other alternatives.
Just on that, Chester, I've got a problem with the idea that Subic in particular isn't
particularly a port, an airfield, fine,
a deep
port.
water port, a natural deep water harbor is highly contested strategic. It's a highly contested strategic prize anywhere, and I would imagine that even if it's now a commercial port, to park an aircraft carrier off that commercial port must still
have
happen.
power.
Yeah, and have power.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, the Philippine Navy, of course, doesn't have a lot of modern deep water ocean going vessels. So I can understand from a local perspective, it may not have strategic value, but for visiting American warships, obviously where they would pull in, Subic would be an obvious location for that, right?
Yes, that's the reason why the armed forces has to reassess again the bases, because basically because of the changing security right now posed by by China, and also another thing would be the technology that armed forces should also be acquiring. One was, of course, right now we still have a cyber security maritime technologies that would help us to counter both the Chinese incursion and the threats coming from maritime cybersecurity. I haven't seen one, and I was proposing that to our Coast Guard and to the Philippine Navy and Marines. I think, given the weak defense posture of the Philippines and the undergoing AFP modernization program, they see those are just in the blueprint right now. There are plans, but of course, when you plan, you need some sophisticated technology, human resources, and money, basically. And of course, the political will coming from the government. Because even if you plan, if it is not approved by the Politburo, then that becomes also a problem there. And also, it should align to the policy and the strategy of the government. But it seems like right now we have, like I said, we have flip-flopping policies and strategies. That's the reason why, even if you have bright ideas, clever ideas there, it becomes futile after all, because no one is supporting it.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of mismatches there.
Last question, Chester. In all this situation, okay, economic development to grow the middle class, to make sure that there are different people who can stand for parliament in 10, 15 years. So you move away for a historical elite or, reactionary mini oligarchs to people who actually have the interest of the middle class in the country in mind. Where are the best economic opportunities to kickstart the Philippines economy?
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. Mindanao is the promised land in the Philippines. And a lot of Filipinos, particularly from Mindanao, were so happy when Duterte became the president because he's the first president coming from Mindanao. It's the promised land, the last frontier that I said, because basically when it comes to natural resources, Mindanao is very rich. It is also a backdoor to some of our ASEAN neighbors, maritime ASEAN neighbors like Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia. And these are all rich countries compared to us. In Southeast Asia, and also a lot of investments right now are in Mindanao, plainly because of the seat of power of Davao, where the president is from, but also because they see a prospect of development in that region. Really, if you go to Mindanao, it's really beautiful, rich in resources. It's multi-diverse because you see tri-people there, meaning to say you have Christians, Muslims, and the indigenous people, which you cannot see in Visayas or in Luzon Islands. Now, given the richness, opulence of that region, and also a lot of amalgamation of issues, national security issues are there. You have insurgency, Muslim secessionism, and then of course some incursions also, because the Sulu Sea is very rich in natural resources, and of course the transboundary of migrants also between Malaysia and Indonesia going to the Philippines, or Filipinos going to Malaysia, and Brunei and to Malaysia, Indonesia, something like that. So you have all those amalgamation of issues there. And I think a lot of Filipinos from Mindanao, from Visayas and Luzon would want to migrate to Mindanao because of the many things it can offer. And also the plan of the government is to decentralize development and progress, so that it will not only be contained in Manila. In Visayas, you have Cebu there as the Queen City, and then of course in Mindanao you have Davao. So if we decentralize development, then Filipinos would no longer go to Manila, and that would also contain the problem of overpopulation and economic distribution. Because basically, if we could distribute, because the problem, a lot of questions on inclusive growth has been a main question in the Philippines. Then the strategy and the plan of the government is to decentralize and distribute wealth evenly from Manila to Cebu to Davao. But amongst the islands, main islands in the Philippines, Mindanao is really the promised land so far. And I think this should be the center of development. And like what I said, if we offer development to people, and if Mindanao becomes prosperous, then at least we could contain the issues on terrorism, insurgency, because by having middle classes already, a large middle class in the Philippines, of course, that would also an answer to the long protracted issues on social injustice, poverty, and unequal distribution of wealth.
So really a war on poverty in Mindanao as a first step to kick everything else off, which gives a very clear target for where the investment and the capacity building needs to be. So as much as it looks chaotic, you can go, no, if we narrow focus on an island, the benefits will ripple out and we'll also be able to judge success much faster. Okay.
Chester, I've got one final question. Now, I know strategic forecasting is a fraught business.
Yeah.
But what is your take on Duterte's chances of winning in 2022?
Okay. There are two plans basically, although it's not yet pronounced, because that is the tactic now, not to divulge information yet. Because if you do that, people will start scanning your bad records and your skeleton in your closet. But basically, the plan that the rumors are, one, Sarah, the daughter of Duterte, is running for president, and she has huge chances because based on the surveys, every survey that comes out in the Philippines, she tops the survey. Okay. And there are other female candidates who are vying for presidency. And the second remedy is to put Duterte as vice president, because in our constitution, it is allowed for the president to run another office, but not as president, because re-election as president is not allowed in our constitution. Remember, there's a precedence. Gloria Arroyo became a congresswoman, a representative, after she became the president. Then there is a proposal that Duterte/Duterte would be a good tandem, the daughter and father. Well, there are two, in my own mind, that would be advantageous for Rodrigo Duterte because of the many phases, the many challenges that he will face after his presidency. His immunity will, of course, be gone, and definitely he would be charged by the international court and maybe local courts here because of the human rights, alleged human rights violations that he committed with his drug war and some other controversial policies that he implemented in the Philippines. But based from rumors also, the daughter is very smart and has a mind of her own. And she's a trained lawyer, and she is married to a lawyer, Carpio. And one of our justices, retired justice here, is very vocal about the West Philippine Sea and about Duterte's stance on the West Philippine Sea. So meaning to say that, politics in the Philippines is more personalistic than institutional. So we'll see a very carnival-like election in 2022, despite the pandemic that we are still suffering right now.
Well, you did say, Chester, that the Philippines is excellent when it comes to lawfare, and it seems like the Duterte family is aiming to capture the high ground on that, yeah?
Thank you.
Or to crawl to the top of the heap.
Hopefully, we will continue with that.
Indeed.
And hopefully, of course, that's still a strategy. Lawfare is something that where the Philippines has excelled so far. And if we continue that in containing China, because that's the only thing that, we need a lot of diplomatic protests and voices and noises, because by doing that, that would hound the next generation of Chinese people. If they know that there were issues that were thrown to them in claiming all those highness that they have in the future, that they will have in the future, then it becomes a problem on how, a dilemma for them on the legitimacy and sovereignty of their country.
Isn't lawfare, though, as good as your enforcement? But if you can't enforce the law, then does it become something less than what it should be? Yeah.
And also because the enforcement, it becomes, in our Philippine culture, as an anthropologist, wearing my hat as an anthropologist here, we don't have a strong culture on implementation. We think a lot, we say a lot, but when it comes to implementation and enforcement, that becomes our problem. Mm-hmm. And I think we should change that kind of culture. Culture change is powerful, and that's intergenerational. Yep. If we cannot do it, maybe the next generation can do it. And of course, we have to echo to them that, implementation, proper enforcement is the key on changing the behaviors of the Filipinos. Because basically, if we just talk and just think, then that becomes a problem. Although we know that for a fact that we have bright ideas, but when we implement it, it's really not that good. It's inefficient.
So it's a two-part strategy. It needs to be economic growth in Mindanao and institutional growth across the entire country. And everything else really will only stick if it has those two things to hang off.
Well, on that interesting note, I think we shall call that one a wrap. Thank you very much to our special guest, Dr. Chester Cabalza, for being on Strategicon. My thanks to co-host David Olney and to producer Tim for their contributions. And to our audience, thanks for listening. We hope that you'll join us for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you can subscribe to the audio version of Strategicon through the Ozcast Network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. And please like us on the Sage International Facebook site and follow us on Twitter. We appreciate your support. You can also watch our podcasts on video through the Strategicon Raw YouTube channel when they are available, easily accessed by clicking on the link provided on our website. Also, please comment on any of our articles and podcasts through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course on the Sage International site. We welcome any constructive feedback that can help improve our products, and we look forward to engaging with our followers. If you would like to support Strategicon, remember to check out our merch page. We have a wide variety of items to keep the Strategicon listeners satisfied. Until next time, goodbye.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.